Good morning and welcome, and thank you very much for joining us this morning for this news conference. President Zoellick will begin with opening remarks and then take your questions. I would ask you, if you could, please identify yourself and the name of your outlet, and if you could limit it to one question, that'll help us get around the room. And if you haven't had a chance yet to turn off cell phones, this would be a great opportunity. Mr. Zoellick, sir.
Thank you, Carl. Well, we have a number of important issues that we'll be discussing at these meetings. First, we have to re-energize the international community, donors and clients, to meet the Millennium Development Goals. We're at the halfway point. Much of the world is on track to have extreme poverty, but there are very serious shortfalls in reducing child and maternal mortality and in education, sanitation, nutrition. On current trends, sub-Saharan Africa could miss all the Millennium Development Goals. This must not happen. How does this relate to the current financial crisis? We have to connect the dots. While we're witnessing upheaval in the financial markets, we're also seeing new growth poles in India and China. And yes, although we have short-term illiquidity, you've actually got a lot of money out there looking for some place to go. So we must respond to the immediate emergency situation, but do so in a way that can seize opportunities for the medium and long term, which will stimulate inclusive and sustainable growth and to help reach those Millennium Development Goals. Last week I outlined 4 areas for action. EITI++, key to trying to ensure that countries that are rich in resources, which can be drivers of growth, don't fall short of their potential, lose out to corruption, or even to slip into conflict among fortune hunters. We'll be launching this initiative on Saturday. A 1% solution to build equity investment in Africa so that it can become a complementary growth pole over the next 10 or 15 years, just as China, India, and Brazil and others are complementary poles today. The allocation of even 1% of the assets of sovereign wealth funds to equity investment in Africa could draw $30 billion to African growth, development, and opportunity. It's the World Bank Group's role, especially through the IFC, to develop the investment platform for this equity investment, completion of the Doha round, and a new deal for global food policy. We'll also be discussing climate change. We will not succeed unless we bring the interests and needs of developing countries to the table. We'll be discussing this on Sunday morning at a meeting of the Bali Breakfast, a group of development and finance ministers that will become a regular feature of the spring and annual meetings, precisely because we need to get development and finance ministers from developing and developed countries alike to sit around the same table. Addressing climate change won't work if it's simply seen as a rich man's club. But let me end my remarks on the subject of food and rising food prices. In U.S. and Europe over the last year, we've been focused on the prices of gasoline at the pump, $2.50, $3, $3.50, and more. While many are worrying about filling their gas tanks, many others around the world are struggling to fill their stomachs, and it's getting more and more difficult every day. In many developing countries, the poor spend up to 75% of their income on food. When prices of basic foods rise, it hits hard. Let me just give you 2 examples. In just 2 months, rice prices have skyrocketed to near historical levels, rising by around 75% globally and more in some markets, with more likely to come. In Bangladesh, a 2-kilogram bag of rice, like this, now consumes about half of the daily income of a poor family. With little margin for survival, rising prices too often mean fewer meals. Or take wheat, where over the past year the price has risen by 120%. That means that the price of a loaf of bread, like this, has more than doubled. Poor people in Yemen are now spending more than a quarter of their incomes just on bread before they pay for other essential foods for their children, let alone basic health care or shelter. This is not just about meals foregone today or about increasing social unrest. It is about lost learning potential for children and adults in the future, stunted intellectual and physical growth. Even more, we estimate that the effects of this food crisis on poverty reduction worldwide is on the order of 7 lost years. So we need to address this not just as an immediate emergency, but also in the medium term for development. Now, meetings such as this are usually about talk. Words can focus attention. They can build momentum. But we can't be satisfied with studies and paper and talk. This is about recognizing a growing emergency, acting, and seizing opportunity too. The world can do this. We can do this. We can have a new deal on global food policy. First, for the immediate crisis, the international community must fill the at least $500 million food gap identified by the UN's World Food Program to meet emergency needs. Government should be able to come up with this assistance and come up with it now. And we need to expand and improve access to safety net programs, such as cash transfers and risk management instruments to protect the poor. We need to increase financial support for short-term needs, restructuring existing projects and fast-tracking grants and loans where needed. We must make agriculture a priority. The bank has announced that it will double agricultural lending for sub-Saharan Africa over the next year, from $450 million to $800 million. IFC, our private sector arm, will be boosting its agribusiness investments across the value chain of production. And we need to complete the Doha round. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll be pleased to take your questions. And once again, if you could identify yourself and the name of your outlet, that would be very helpful. Gentleman from TV Globo, sir. And also wait for the microphone, which will come to you.
Good morning. Fernando Silva Pinto from TV Globo, Brazil. It seems clear, the picture that you paint, but how do you think you can go about obtaining these contributions and this change of policy? In the case of Brazil, there is a large amount of arable land and technology and all that. Do you have a specific message to Brazil on how to help in this food crisis?
Well, as I suggested, you have to look at this as a combination of actions. And I've been very pleased that a number of world leaders seem to be sharing and seizing the moment. Prime Minister Brown of Britain just wrote a letter to Prime Minister Fukuda as the chair of the G8, urging that the UN agencies that work on food, the World Bank and the IMF, work together to try to identify across the spectrum of actions. The first and most important, and I just urge this for all countries, and I know it's primarily an obligation of developed countries, but if a developing country like Brazil that was a generous contributor to IDA, our support for the poorest, can help as well with food, is we've got to get that food to the World Food Program, whether cash, commodities, a combination, because you can just, every time you open the newspapers, you can see the crisis that this is causing. In Haiti, the World Food Program made a call for about another $70–80 million. It only has about $17 or $20 million. I mean, you've got riots. You've got things that are threatening that government. So the first is to try to meet that need. The second, what we're trying to do is to, as the paper suggested yesterday, work with governments to look at the array of programs, depending on their capacity, that they can put in place quickly. It might be food for work programs. It may be targeted food or cash assistance programs. The school feeding programs can be really important because some of those are in place, but you can expand them. Sometimes if you just give extra food to a child going to school, they can bring it home to their parents and help deal with that issue. But then we also have suggested in some countries that still have had high tariffs on food, so they're blocking food. And then we need to stop countries from doing things that make the crisis worse and actually build a sense of hoarding, as some of the bans on food and exports. Brazil has been a very good agricultural producer, a very strong producer, and so one of the things that the Brazil government has talked about working with us on is sharing some of its expertise in agricultural research, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's the other key component that we're trying to move quickly towards, is trying to expand the production. You know, you have some countries, I was just looking at the situation in some in Central Asia where missed the spring growing season but are moving into the summer growing season. So even in the course of this year in the growing season, one can make a difference. In some countries in Africa, the problem is fertilizer. It's a question of getting the fertilizer in the inputs. So Brazil is a country that has had great agricultural experience, so there's short and medium-term aspects as well as sort of helping to share its experience overall. And then Brazil will be an important player in the Doha negotiations, which are very important to build confidence for the world economy and help, you know, end these prospects of the impediments of subsidies and tariff barriers that have impeded the market.
Thank you. Barry from Voice of America, in the back here, gentleman in the tan suit.
Barry Wood, Voice of America. Mr. Zoellick, what's your analysis as to why prices of rice and wheat have risen so rapidly, and what should be done to get the prices down?
Well, on the causes, the reports that we just released over this week highlight a number of the elements. One, you do have globally some shifting of diet and higher incomes and people shifting to, for example, meat, which will use more grain. Our report yesterday highlighted the effect of the biofuels issue. In some cases, you've also had climatic conditions. You've had very bad droughts in Australia, some in Central Europe. What has further complicated this market is that food stocks are very, very low. So you actually have a similarity here to what you see in the energy markets, where in the energy markets the ability to expand capacity is quite limited. And in agriculture, the ability to have stocks that deal with extreme circumstances are very, very low. And that means that if there's any fear or uncertainty or any sense of hoarding or sense that prices may be going up, you have much greater risk in the sense of that you can't bring other supply online. And so that's a complicating feature with financial markets, because as people have money that they want to invest, one needs to recognize that energy and food is now part of commodity prices. And so people will shift to commodity prices as an asset class. So you have a number of activities here that are coming together. I mentioned some of the short-term things one needs to do, but of course the medium and long-term answer is to try to increase the productivity and increase the supply of food. Now this creates an opportunity, as I outlined in the speech I gave, because a lot of the opportunities for increasing productivity are in the developing world. We saw great increases through the Green Revolution in South Asia and India. We believe that we can have a green revolution in sub-Saharan Africa, but based on different dimensions. In the case of India, it was very much crop varieties and some supporting inputs. In the case of sub-Saharan Africa, we have to look all across the value chain. Tenure, knowing you own your own land, allowing women to be able to own land, because a lot of the roles of women in rural areas, their one role in the economy is in agriculture. Fertilizers, irrigation systems, marketing systems. We've also seen where you have a country that is very dependent on rain for its agriculture. You may have boom and bust. So there's ways you can use markets and risk mitigation tools that we can use to try to help avoid the good years and the bad years in terms of prices that create aspects of uncertainty. And then there's avoiding the distortions in the global market and the trading system. So what I've tried to do over the past weeks is to outline some of the steps, and we're trying to work with individual countries on their needs, but we're also trying to make some points about the need of the global food system, which is why I called for a new deal for global food policy.
Okay, gentleman in the front row, please, from TASS.
Thank you. My name is Andrei Sitov. I'm with TASS, the Russian news agency. Thank you, sir, for your dramatic and concise presentation. I wanted to ask you about which countries of the former Soviet Union are especially vulnerable to the food problems that you've described to us. And also, on a more general subject, does what you say imply that the bank needs to shift its resources to these countries and basically to the poor, like for instance from some new members of the EU, from some politicized cases like Kosovo and things like that? Thank you.
As for your first question, I've been focused most recently on some of the countries of Central Asia that start out as poorer countries and have particular vulnerabilities. As for your second question, and as you look towards Ukraine and Russia, those have historically been very good agriculture producers. So I would look to that as potential support on the production side. As for your second question, I think the World Bank can handle a range of activities. I talked a little bit about the climate change. There's important work that we're trying to do, all related to the Millennium Development Goals, health, education. So our priority is certainly for those that are the poorest countries. At the same time, because a lot of our service is bringing knowledge and learning activities, that is also available for middle-income countries. And these become connected. In many of the so-called middle-income countries, you have very large poor populations. You can keep in mind that in China, India, the middle-income countries represent 70% of the people living under $2 a day. So you have a lot of poor in these countries. Just to give you an example of the different range of innovation, in Mexico, we have been working with the government on some financial innovation to try to be able to help with natural disasters such as earthquakes. And this built on some activities that we did in the Caribbean with hurricanes. So part of the new bank operations are trying to serve all our clients, but recognize you have to customize your services depending on their needs.
Okay, thanks. Bob Davis in the front, please.
Hi, Bob Davis with the Wall Street Journal. Two questions. As you said, these meetings are often about talk. What would you specifically hope to accomplish that the members here will accomplish by the end of the weekend? And the second, in the paper that the bank published yesterday, put a lot of emphasis on biofuels as the reason that food prices are going up. Do you think that countries ought to rethink their focus on biofuels, or at least some countries?
Let me deal with the second one first, Bob. On biofuels, it's important as any time you have a product to distinguish among different aspects. So, as I've said on other occasions, the data that I've seen suggests that the sugar-based biofuels out of Brazil have the greatest benefits in terms of both fuel and dealing with the climactic effects. I also think that there are some important possibilities with some of the second-generation biofuels, some of the cellulosic developments that we've been in touch with some around the world that are trying to deal with some of the energy security issues. So what we're seeking to do in the report is recognizing that biofuels have responded to different purposes. One is they've responded to the very high energy prices. Some of them have responded to concerns about energy security, that people should look closely at the effects of these and see the effects in terms of overall food prices. If they have got subsidies for these, they should certainly consider whether the subsidies make sense. If they have tariffs at the same time as impede the imports of something that they're subsidized, that certainly would be something people should look and see if that makes economic sense. And at the same time, they need to see food and agricultural policy as a whole, which is why I tried to emphasize this in the speech. And I would hope that countries that, for whatever reason, of energy security and others have emphasized biofuel development will be particularly sensitive to the call to meet the emergency needs for people that may not have enough food to eat, and which contributes to malnutrition, which, as we've tried to point out, I started doing this at the time of Davos, is, in my view, is in some ways the most dangerous Millennium Development Goal to fail to meet, because the effects run through a whole generation. You know, we now have evidence that children who have malnutrition in early ages, particularly -9 months, pregnancy period to 24, it stunts their growth, physical and mental, their whole life. So this is the issue that we're trying to draw additional attention to. Your first question was what to expect out of this. Well, my basic hope is that we can come out of this with additional momentum on the items that I was highlighting coming into the spring meetings and with the speech. That includes, first and foremost, trying to build more support for this emergency need for the World Food Program. And then on top of that, the types of thing that Prime Minister Brown and others have been saying of a supportive nature about the outline for food program development. I also, but you know, I'm not waiting, frankly, for that. What I tried to outline today is, you know, we're trying to shift and reallocate resources. You know, we've added $10 million in Haiti because of the conditions. We shifted or added some monies to Burkina Faso. There's 3 other African countries we're trying to focus attention on. The programs in Haiti are going to deal with issues like mother-to-child feeding and school feeding and some labor-intensive work programs. We're working with Bangladesh. We have 2 IDA loans, which are concessionary grants that we raised the money for last year, of $320 million that we want to bring to the board, and that will help us deal with some of the fiscal gap that high food and oil prices have created in Bangladesh. In Yemen, we're sitting down with them right now to try to create the systems to provide cash transfers to the poorest. And we have about $170 million in support for increasing agricultural productivity in Yemen. So in country after country, I'm working with our teams to see either where we need to shift, add, bring other resources to bear. And since you know, we're by nature a development, not a humanitarian emergency organization, with some of these to try to see how we can work with others. And in food, most of all, part of the challenge, and I've been very pleased, my colleagues have been working on this for some time, is with the FAO, the World Food Program, IFAD, we've got to get the different pieces of this network to move more effectively together. And I've been pleased that we've got some support from some of the NGOs also to do this. I also, as I mentioned in my remarks, we plan to have the formal launch of our Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative Plus Plus. We're seeing about some support we can get from some of the NGOs such as Transparency International. You might have seen, if you read the Financial Times today, that Paul Collier and Michael Spence, author of The Bottom Billion and a Nobel Prize winner, were promoting and supportive of the concept. So I'm trying to build momentum in that area as well. In the area of the 1% for sovereign wealth funds, I've been having some ongoing discussions with some of the sovereign wealth funds, and we've got some of the countries and funders here. I want to further explain the idea so that over the course of the coming months, as IFC builds the platform, we can try to draw some of the investment into that.
Okay, lady in the 3rd row in the orange, please.
Good morning. Alicia Salgado from El Financiero newspaper. Mr. Castren's president of the Development Committee said that the World Bank has led behind the institutional crisis that has a year ago, that now is the moment to rethink about the possibility of changes in the World Bank, just in the same way the IMF is doing. So are you prepared for this meeting to introduce a proposal in this sense?
Well, I think Minister Carstens is right. I think, for an institution that was founded over 60 years ago, it certainly makes sense to see how we adjust the voice and participation issues. And it certainly accords with the vision I've outlined of an inclusive and sustainable globalization to make the institution more inclusive. When I came here, I learned that the shareholders, the countries that are members of our board, had recommended that the World Bank wait until the IMF finished its process in terms of some of the share reallocation. And so since that process at least has moved through a very important first step that I compliment Dominique Strauss-Kahn and his predecessor Rodrigo Rado for moving forward, I plan to have, as part of the Development Committee discussions, some initial exchange at the ministerial level to get their appetite for the types of change. These can include, obviously, shares, but there are other aspects, and where they're within our authority, within the World Bank, we haven't waited. Since I've come to the World Bank, I've appointed 4 new officers of the bank, and all 4 of them have been from developing countries, China, Nigeria, Turkey, and Bulgaria, which is in our system a Part 2 country, which is a country in transition. The number of direct reports to me now are about 41-42% from developing countries. We're moving to at the operational level. So, for example, by the end of this year, I believe about 75% of our country directors will be in the field, which is important, and all of those in sub-Saharan Africa will be in the field. We're trying to expand the diversity and inclusiveness of the workforce at all ranks and all levels, and have efforts to do that. Our operational programs are designed to bring ideas to the table, but to have country ownership. So there's a lot that we can do as an institution and are doing. As for the questions that the IMF dealt with, those are questions that ultimately are decided in capitals by the shareholders. So my hope is to get a sense of the range of views and possibilities, and then we'll need to work with them to try to come up with a reform plan of our own.
Okay, thanks. The lady in the back row, please.
Good morning, Mr. Zoellick. I'm Carol Gravin from Radio Canada. What can the World Bank do concretely to convince countries that this time around they have to do something, and you don't have a stick and you don't have a carrot? So what can you do concretely?
To do something
to convince them to do more to help you and help the countries that need help.
On food?
Yes, on food.
On food. We have a microphone or a megaphone as a start, and it's getting some attention because I think that in many societies in the developed world, there's a recognition that the danger of people starving and suffering is something that people want to act on. So I've seen that discussions in the U.S. and the European Commission have talked about some emergency food aid support. I've recommended to the Japanese, as host of TCAD, which is a meeting every 4 or 5 years on Africa, as well as the G8 summit, that they be supportive. And I think that in this sense, meetings such as this and the attention helps focus the priorities of political leaders on an issue such as that. Secondly, we then need to try to use the policy institutions to try to drive forward some of the ideas. So I was pleased that Prime Minister Brown pushed forward the idea. It's a very similar set of issues that along the lines of the ones that I've suggested. And then they are helping us now in the sense that, last year I worked very hard over the 6 months I was here to get additional contributions to IDA 15, which is for the 80 or so poorest countries, grants and concessionary loans, and include in our own contributions, we got $41.6 billion. So a lot of that money will go towards this types of expansion of things that we've talked about in the agriculture area. But there are other players here, like the question you had from Brazil. I've been very pleased about the Brazilian interest in sharing some of its agricultural expertise. Ultimately, there are issues such as export bans and others that, as you say, they're within the power of sovereign states, but I think we can help shine the light on them and explain how they're counterproductive policies. Part of what one does in an international institution is try to put out the best facts, make the best arguments, rally support for the cause. And this is not only, I hope, useful for the governments, but their publics. And I found that particularly on some of the basic issues of survival and food and malnutrition, there's a very strong interest in whether in religious groups or whether in college campuses or others. And I certainly saw this in some humanitarian issues like Darfur that I worked on. So that's part of what we're trying to do.
Okay, gentleman in the front row, please.
Frederick Addison, African Insight. As far as African countries go, which is a bigger priority, meeting the Millennium Development Goals or growing the economies? Because there are two tracks right now.
Yeah, I don't think you can have an either or. I think you need both. And from the start of my tenure here, I have emphasized that when I visited West Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa before becoming president of the World Bank, I got a very strong message that a number of the countries wanted to focus on help on the social development agenda, on Millennium Development Goals. They knew those were the prerequisite and the foundation in education and health and basic needs. But they didn't want to stop with that, and that's what I found so encouraging. They wanted a growth agenda, and they wanted infrastructure, they wanted energy, they wanted regional integration, they wanted to develop their private sector. And in the speech that I gave last week, in part trying to link this to the possibilities for investment in Africa, I pointed out that 17 countries in sub-Saharan Africa had grown on average 5.5% between 1995 and 2005. That's reasonably good growth rates. And so if one is looking towards building on something, that's something to build on. There were another 7 countries that grew about 8 or 9% that were the resource development countries. And you could see exactly where the EITI++ fits in that. We want to make sure that countries have the full range of capacity and knowledge so as to use those resources to avoid some of the problems of dual economies and resource curses and others. There was a third category, and we'll be talking about that at the Development Committee as well, and that's post-conflict states and those that are facing state breakdown. And if you look at the population of sub-Saharan Africa, you roughly have about a third in each. And that last category is one that I want to continue to draw attention to with the ministers, because it's not only heartrending and disastrous for the people in those countries, but it has overflow effects on their neighbors. So I believe that, as I said, that with the right work and attention and support, there are great possibilities in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think part of the mission of the bank is to look at different ways: agriculture, resource development, post-conflict situations, this idea of trying to channel equity investment, that we can be supportive of Africans who want to grow.
And we have time for a final question. Gentleman in the front row here.
Well, Jérôme Sekana de la République démocratique du Congo. Vous prônez la révolution verte.
Sorry.
Voilà, Jérôme Sekana de la République démocratique du
Just a
Congo.
minute. Despite my ever request to have these turned on before I come. Anybody have the English channel? English channel? Thank you. Okay.
Voilà, Jérôme Sekana de la République démocratique du Congo, vous prônez la révolution verte pour résoudre la crise alimentaire qui sévit à travers le monde maintenant, et notamment en Afrique. Comment comptez-vous intervenir?
I'm not getting it, so can somebody either translate? Channel 4? Yes, please.
Voilà, je disais que vous prenez la révolution verte pour résoudre la crise alimentaire qui sévit à travers le monde, notamment en Afrique. Qu'est-ce que vous comptez faire concrètement pour combattre la sous-alimentation? Est-ce que vous allez accorder des dons ou vous allez industrialiser l'agriculture? Parce que vous avez dit que votre enveloppe va passer de 450 à 800 millions de dollars. Est-ce que ce montant est suffisant? Surtout quand on sait que déjà il y a des tensions au Sénégal, au Cameroun, sur la vie chère, notamment la crise alimentaire. Qu'est-ce que vous allez faire concrètement? Est-ce que ne voyez-vous pas que vous êtes en face d'un problème qui nécessite de gros moyens pour le résoudre? Merci.
Right. Well, first, I think one has to distinguish the different steps. The first one that I've emphasized, building on the work of the World Food Program, is you need at least $500 million, and I think their estimates are actually going up. But it's also important how that money is spent and how the aid is spent. So there have been great advances in micronutrients, and this goes to your question about dealing with some of the malnutrition. You now have the ability, with a cup of food, to be able to customize the nutritional needs for different areas around the world. I'm sorry, I'm speaking a little faster. So that you could try to make sure that children not only and their families not only get food, but get the right nutrition. So you're very right to focus on that dimension. Secondly, there's the array of programs that we can be involved in, but some of the other UN agencies are involved in that I've mentioned. School feeding programs are tremendous because they help get kids to school. They help make sure that they have the nutrition to learn. As I said, some of them can also create an incentive to bring some food back to the family. There are food for work programs. These are programs that the type of things that, as I mentioned, that we're trying to set up right now with Yemen is the notion of people in a community may decide that they want to work on an irrigation system. They may want to work on some roads. They may want to work on a forestation project to help deal with the winds or other aspects. And you can provide the food, and in return, people will help build aspects that invest in their community over time. More developing economies, Mexico, Brazil has done a good example of this. Egypt is looking at this, have what are called conditional cash transfer programs, and we're actively involved with these, where you target cash on some of the poorest countries, and in return, the families agree to send their children to school, and they agree to get basic medical and preventive health care. Now, to go to the production side that you mentioned, the $450 million to $800 million was something we're trying to do over the next year. So obviously that's not the end of the process. And in terms of what those programs will look like, we need to develop this with each country. Each country's circumstances are different. But as I use this term across the value chain, and we want to be attentive to small holders as well as larger farm possibilities. And I alluded to, but the papers give more detail about the types of things, fertilizer, irrigation, market systems. One that I'm very interested in, and we've started to do some work on, but I want us to do more, is to try to deal with some of the risks of farmers small farmers that start to move into the market system, and if there's volatility in prices or weather. So, we help provide technical support to a project that the World Food Program did with Ethiopia, and as I recall, with AXA, a large French insurance company, to do drought futures, so that the agriculture in Ethiopia is very dependent on rainfall. So if you can create an insurance system that says if you get drought, and we can refine these with various parameters of conditions, then you get money that helps support it. I think we need to look at trying to do these to provide more support sort of further down in the agricultural system. So that's why, again, when I spoke about a new deal for global food policy, I'm trying to emphasize it's not just food today. and it's not just food production tomorrow. It's everything along the spectrum, and we have to look at the full range of inputs in activities and risk mitigation measures. So part of the point I was trying to make in my speech last week is I think the challenge for institutions like the World Bank, or governments for that matter, is to deal with the immediate, but deal with the immediate in a way that sets up longer-term policy change. So you're not just moving from crisis to crisis. And so a lot of what we're talking about this week and weekend is how do we meet the immediate needs, going to some of your questions, but how do we set the foundations in place to move ahead for these issues over coming years. And agriculture in Africa is one that has tremendous benefits, not only in terms of supply, but we did a World Development Report last year that showed that the benefits for overcoming poverty of a gain in agriculture are 3 times that of other sectors. So a lot of poor people are in rural areas, and the benefits for women's empowerment are also great. But this is where also if we can help change some of the rules to allow women to be able to have better property rights and ability to keep some of the sweat of their brow or the benefit of the sweat of their brow, that would be helpful too.
Thank you very much, and the remarks that Mr. Zoellick delivered will be available at the entrance as you leave. Thanks very much.